Hey guys, tonight we step into the cold corridors of Tudor England, where candlelight flickers against stone walls, still echoing with whispers of betrayal, faith, and fire. Picture London in the year 1553. Church bells ringing out, crowds pressing together, banners and velvet drapes hanging across the streets. And right in the middle of it all stands Mary Tudor, the daughter of Henry VIII. No longer the forgotten child, but the very first Queen of England to take the crown by her own right. Her story was written in victories and tragedies, in faith and in fire, and trust me, if you had to live through those scenes, you probably wouldn't last long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me welcome Amelia Pelichmansig. Pelichla. I'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're sitting there, the lights dimmed, and I'm inviting you to drift back through time to a cold February morning in the year 1516. On the banks of the River Thames, Greenwich Palace echoed with the sound of bells, announcing the birth of a very special figure. Imagine it, chambers glowing with hundreds of candles, the smell of incense mixed with herbs filling the air, and hymns rising from the chapel. That tiny newborn girl was Mary Tudor, the one history would later call by the infamous name Bloody Mary. From the very first moment she opened her eyes, Mary was unlike any other child in England. She was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, two names powerful enough to make nobles bow. In 7 years of marriage, Catherine had borne several children, but all had died in infancy. Only Mary survived. That fact alone made people see her as a small miracle, a living sign of God's will. And of course, it also placed on her shoulders the heavy burden of being England's only heir. Think about it. In the 16th century, the idea of a woman ruling a kingdom was rarer than winning the lottery. England had never before had a reigning queen, so from birth, Mary's destiny hovered like a question mark over the court. Would she one day be a queen in her own right, or just a pawn to be married off for a political alliance? The official record here is this. On February 18, 1516, Mary was baptized in a grand ceremony at Greenwich, with bells ringing throughout the city. It wasn't just a baptism, it was practically a national event. But here's a strange little detail most people don't know. Mary was personally taught Latin by her mother, Catherine. It might not sound like much now, but back then, Latin was the language of men, of priests and scholars. A little girl, barely old enough to walk steadily, chanting Ave Maria while other boys her age were running in the gardens, that raised quite a few aristocratic eyebrows. Catherine, being from the Spanish royal family, believed her daughter would never be less than any prince. Historians still argue about whether Henry VIII really saw Mary as a potential heir at the time. Some say he adored her so much he called her the pearl of the world, proof of his hopes for her. Others insist Henry only viewed her as a bargaining chip, waiting for the day he could marry her off to a European prince. Personally, I think with a king as famously moody as Henry, both could be true, depending on whether he woke up in a good mood or not. Mary's childhood was fairly peaceful, at least for the first few years. Picture a little red-haired girl in a velvet dress listening to musicians play the lute and sing lullabies in Latin. Mary loved music, and she could play the clavichord, a small old-style keyboard instrument, kind of like a baby piano. If she were alive today, she'd probably be the kid whose mom insists she takes piano lessons while she secretly just wants to scroll through TikTok. At 9 years old, Mary was sent to Ludlow, the place where princes were usually trained to govern Wales. It was a symbolic decision, putting a girl in a role meant for the Prince of Wales. It showed that Henry at that time truly had no son, and Mary was his only heir. Imagine it. a 9-year-old with her own government office in Ludlow. While most kids today argue over who gets the biggest slice of cake, Mary was sitting on a little throne, technically in charge of an entire region. But, as in every Netflix drama, just when you think the story is smooth sailing, the plot takes a sharp turn. In 1528, Mary was pulled back from Ludlow to the royal court, right when her father decided to dump his wife. Henry VIII had fallen for Anne Boleyn, a young, clever, and fiercely ambitious woman. The only problem, the Pope refused to grant Henry a divorce from Catherine. 163 years, Henry looked like he'd made a mistake, like he was a different man. And so, tragedy began to creep into Mary's childhood. But hold on, let's pause at this child in politics moment, because there's another curious fact. At just 2 years old, Mary was married in a symbolic ceremony to the French prince, the Dauphin, son of King Francis I. The ritual had all the trappings of a real wedding, except the groom was, well, still a child himself. Imagine a toddler in a puffy dress, barely knowing her alphabet, already cast as a bride in a diplomatic performance. If you think arranged marriages today sound stressful, back then it was literally child's play. Scholars still debate whether Mary was truly happy in her early years. One side argues she was well cared for, cherished by both parents, and enjoyed a contented childhood. Others believe she lived under the shadow of endless political expectations, more pawn than child. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Mary was both loved and trapped, a girl nurtured at home yet bound by destinies she never chose. Can you sense it? In the whispers of time, Mary always appears as a divided figure, the pearl princess on one hand, the political chess piece on the other. It's a bit like being praised as the perfect student just because you get good grades, while secretly all you want is to skip class and play video games. A little joke, but you get the idea. The soundscape of Tudor court life must have been strange indeed. Harpsichord notes floating through stone halls, footsteps clattering on the floor, and the hushed schemes of courtiers. In her study, Mary bent over her Latin, handwriting so neat it would put some modern teachers to shame. She had no idea that within just a few years all those privileges would be stripped away, and she'd face the bitter lesson that being a princess doesn't guarantee happiness. And so, from that icy morning at Greenwich, a red-haired girl with wide, curious eyes began the journey you and I are about to follow tonight. A journey soaked in sweat, tears, private heartbreaks, and choices that would reshape the fate of an entire kingdom. Listen, everything began to change the moment Henry VIII decided to cast aside Catherine and marry Anne Boleyn. For a child like Mary, it was nothing short of a personal apocalypse. Have you ever felt the sting of your parents fighting, maybe even divorcing? Now, multiply that by 1,000. Add the weight of an entire kingdom, and you'll start to sense the darkness closing in on Mary's childhood. When Anne Boleyn entered court, Mary fell from being the golden heir to nothing more than an illegitimate child. No one called her Princess Mary anymore. She was simply Lady Mary. Her shining title vanished as if it had never existed. Imagine this. You're sitting at the VIP table, and the next minute you're shoved onto a plastic chair at the back of the cafe. That's the kind of bitterness she had to swallow. The clear historical event here. In 1533, Henry VIII officially married Anne Boleyn, defying the Pope. That same year, Elizabeth was born and declared Princess of Wales. In just a matter of months, Mary lost her mother, lost her crown, and was forced to live under the shadow of a newborn half-sister. A little-known fact, Mary was actually made to serve as a lady-in-waiting to baby Elizabeth, a princess who once had her own palace, now tending to an infant sibling. Absurd, isn't it? Like once being class president and then suddenly ordered to clean the chalkboard for the new kid. And Anne Boleyn, according to some records, even told the household staff to punish Mary if she dared to call herself princess. It sounds like a wicked stepmother from a fairy tale, only this time it was history. Historians still debate just how cruel Anne truly was to Mary. Some argue the stories were exaggerated later to tarnish Anne's name after her downfall. Others insist Mary was deeply humiliated and carried that hatred of Anne all her life. I'd say the truth lies somewhere in between. Anne may not have been a full-on villain, but Mary almost certainly experienced it as hell. Picture Mary at this point like a cracked mirror, still shining, but the fracture lines spreading across the surface. She kept up her habits of studying, playing music, and praying, yet behind it all was a slow, gnawing ache, the kind of wound that never heals, only hardens into the desire for revenge and the hunger to restore her honor. Here's another strange detail. When Catherine died in 1536, Mary was nearly broken. She even wrote to Emperor Charles V, her mother's cousin and the most powerful man in Europe, begging to escape to Spain. Imagine a young woman in her early 20s, once at the very center of the kingdom, now desperate just to run away from home. Sounds like the plot of a modern drama, doesn't it? And then suddenly, Anne Boleyn herself fell, arrested, tried, and executed. A chapter closed in blood and sighs. For Mary, it seemed like a chance to reconcile with her father, but Henry was never one to lose in his game of power. He forced Mary to sign a document declaring her mother an unlawful wife and herself a bastard. The devout young woman was torn between her Catholic faith and the fear of losing her life. In the end, she signed. That shaky signature was like a dagger to her own heart, a betrayal of both her faith and her mother's memory. Ask yourself this: if you were 20 years old and forced to deny your own mother just to survive, what kind of person would that make you? Mary chose to endure, but deep inside, the fire of resentment never went out. That ember would one day ignite into the figure history knows as Bloody Mary. A tiny but telling detail. Though Mary signed, her handwriting trembled so much it was almost illegible. The pain bled through the ink more clearly than the words themselves. Maybe you've typed a message while crying, the letters crooked and shaky. That's exactly what her writing looked like. Scholars still argue, did Mary sign out of her own choice, or was she completely coerced? Some believe she did it to save her supporters from charges of treason. Others think she simply collapsed under the crushing pressure. Either way, it's clear in Henry's grand chess game of power, Mary was nothing more than a pawn. Then came another turning point. In 1537, Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, gave birth to Edward. At last Henry had his son, and Mary was shoved even further aside. Yet strangely enough, this gave her nearly a decade of peace. No longer the primary threat, she was granted certain privileges, allowed to live more quietly. Her life had spun full circle: princess, servant, bystander. By now you can see it. Mary's youth was like a diary carved into wood with a knife, beautiful but scarred. She was born to be a princess, yet grew up feeling rejected. That odd combination, raised like a prince, treated like an outcast, forged the woman Mary Tudor would become. And honestly, if you think palace dramas on Netflix are intense, trust me, the real-life story of Mary would put them all to shame. Just a little joke, but imagine binge-watching a series where every plot twist is carved out of real sweat and tears. Mary's youth ended in torment, and there she was, the girl once called the pearl of the world, now hardened into someone who had learned to survive in a palace built on schemes. And this was the foundation for everything to come: the uprising, the throne, and the fires that would forever mark her name as Bloody Mary. Lean your head back, relax, and let me take you into the stormiest years of Mary's young adulthood. If the last chapter showed you a little princess falling straight from heaven to the cold ground, now you'll see her trapped in a gray twilight, Where family was broken, her crown was gone, and her faith was tested day after day. After Henry VIII married Anne Boleyn, Mary officially lost all her glory. She was sent to Hatfield, stripped of the title princess, known only as Lady Mary. Worse still, she was placed in service to her baby half-sister Elizabeth, who couldn't even speak yet. Imagine it, once the brightest star of the party, and suddenly ordered to wipe the tables for the new arrival. Bitter, right? For Mary, this was no joke. The historical record is clear. Mary lived isolated, under strict surveillance. Elizabeth's governess was ordered by Anne herself. If Mary ever dared call herself princess, she was to be slapped immediately. Fairy tale stepmothers? That was the children's version. Real life was far harsher. Here's a detail people rarely mention. Henry VIII cut Mary off for years. He even forbade her from seeing her mother Catherine. In 5 long years, Mary saw her only once. Just imagine, a teenaged girl, already humiliated and alone and unable to find comfort in her mother's arms. That absence carved itself deep into Mary's soul, binding her memory to Catherine forever and planting in her a hatred of Anne Boleyn. Historians still argue, was Henry truly that cruel, or was he trying to force Mary to accept political reality? Some say he treated her like a hostage to pressure Catherine into divorce. Others claim Henry wanted to train Mary, to teach her to bow to the king's authority. Either way, the result was the same: Mary's trust and her sense of family shattered. Picture Mary now, a 17-year-old girl who once sat on her little throne at Ludlow, now kneeling before a baby sister. She wrote letters of sorrow, her handwriting shaky, each word warped like a breaking heart. If it were you, you'd probably slam the table and shout, "I am a princess!" But Mary stayed silent. Any protest might be branded treason. Then, in 1536, Catherine died. Mary broke down completely. She prayed, she wept through the night. Some accounts say she even considered fleeing to Spain to seek shelter with Emperor Charles V. But fate twisted again. Just months later, Anne Boleyn fell to the axe. Anne's death felt like a door opening. Maybe her father would forgive her. Mary wrote to Henry begging to be accepted back. Her letter was desperate, almost pitiful, calling him the only lord who could decide her fate. You can feel the torment between the lines, her devotion to Catholic faith, her fear of death. Henry's answer was cold. He set conditions. Mary must sign a document recognizing him as supreme head of the church, admitting her mother was never a lawful queen, and declaring herself illegitimate. It was the greatest choice of Mary's life, and she signed. The handwriting was rushed, broken, every letter like a cut to the heart. Historians still debate it today. Some say she signed to save her life and protect her supporters. Others insist she had no way out. Whatever the truth, that piece of paper scarred her forever, transforming a proud princess into a haunted soul. And yet, after she signed, Mary gained 10 years of relative peace. By then, Henry had his son Edward, thanks to Jane Seymour. Mary was no longer a threat. She was granted land, allowed to live comfortably, no longer imprisoned so tightly. But that decade of calm was really just the silence before the storm. Here's something fascinating. During those years, Mary became an exceptional keyboard player. Foreign visitors to court praised her skill. Rumor even says she often sang Spanish songs to remind herself that her mother's homeland was her truest anchor. In her heart, Spain felt more like family than England ever did. Again, historians disagree. Did Henry truly forgive Mary, or was it just another political move? Some claim he softened toward his daughter. Others argue he only played along. After all, he had his male heir, and Mary no longer mattered. And honestly, with a king as infamous for changing wives like changing clothes, who can ever say? You can see it. This chapter turned Mary from a confident girl into a grown woman full of scars. She learned to swallow anger, to bow her head, but inside the fire still burned. That flame would flare up when her time finally came. Now, imagine yourself in her place, forced to renounce your mother, stripped of your title, made to serve your baby sister. Could you keep your faith and your pride? Or would you, like Mary, wait in silence for the day you could take it all back? And let's be honest, if this were a TV drama, this would be the build-up season, the kind where the main character is crushed to the lowest point only so they can explode back stronger than ever. That's exactly where Mary stood, at rock bottom, with the storm still only beginning to form. Breathe slowly, keep the rhythm steady, and let me take you deeper into Mary's struggle. If earlier she still clung to a faint hope of her father's love, now you'll see her thrust into a deadly chess match where every signature, every word could mean the death penalty. Let's go back to 1536, the year Anne Boleyn fell beneath the executioner's blade. You'd think Mary might finally breathe easier. One enemy gone, one door of reconciliation cracked open. But no, Henry VIII was never that predictable. He held firm. Mary would only be forgiven if she acknowledged that her mother was never queen, that she herself was illegitimate, and most of all, that Henry was supreme head of the Church of England, not the Pope. History records this clearly. Henry had a document prepared, forcing Mary to sign. Refuse, and she risked being charged with treason, and in Tudor England, treason meant your head rolled. Now put yourself in Mary's shoes, a young woman just over 20, raised in the Catholic faith, revering her mother like a saint, forced to sign away everything. It was like being told to write, "I am not my mother's child," while still clutching your mother's letter over your heart. What's strange is the handwriting itself. Mary's signature was crooked, trembling, so unsteady that modern historians say it looks like the writing of someone who had cried until her strength gave out. Most official documents are cold, lifeless, but here you can almost hear the sobs echoing through each letter. Scholars still debate, did Mary sign purely out of despair or as a survival strategy? Some say she did it to save her own life. Others argue she was protecting her household and friends from charges of treason. Seen in that light, what some call submission might also be seen as sacrifice. But the emotional cost was enormous. After that signature, Mary changed. She was no longer the tearful girl, but a woman who hid her pain, who learned to sit silently and wait. Like a volcano holding back its lava, she was ready to erupt one day. Want to hear a rare detail? After signing, Mary was allowed back at court, but instead of celebrating, Henry ignored her. On one occasion, when Mary knelt and begged for affection, Henry merely glanced at her and walked away. Imagine that. The coldness of the Tudor court was harsher than any English winter. And yet, here's the paradox. After acknowledging herself a bastard, Mary was restored to the line of succession. In 1544, Parliament declared that after Edward, the crown would pass to Mary, then to Elizabeth. The girl, once branded illegitimate, was back as heir, simply because Henry changed his mind. Classic sunshine and storm, from a king infamous for his moods. Historians still argue whether Henry softened out of love or if he merely needed backup heirs in case Edward didn't survive. Some say Henry always loved Mary, just demanded her obedience. Others think putting her back in line was nothing but a contingency plan, like keeping a spare card in hand. And you can feel it, can't you? This whole period turned Mary into a contradiction, both the forgiven daughter and the permanently stained child. She lived, but in shame. She returned to court, but always under the shadow of illegitimacy. If this were a palace drama, you'd probably shout, "So what is she now, a princess or not?" And the truth is, both, and neither. A little jest, but that's the tragedy. Looking back, it explains why Mary later became so uncompromising. Her youth was shredded by documents, politics, and forced submissions. Every concession was a knife to her pride, and every knife carved deeper the resolve that one day she would reclaim it all. By now, Mary was like a shattered mirror, no longer whole, but reflecting something colder, sharper, more dangerous. And believe me, in those cracks, the Queen history would call, Bloody Mary was already taking shape. Take a slow breath, because from here, the story carries us into a new reign. The reign of Edward VI, Henry VIII's only son. If before Mary had to bow to her father, now you'll see her bow to a boy of just 10 years old who suddenly wore the crown. When Henry VIII died in 1547, the throne passed to Edward, and Mary, now past 30, suddenly found herself subject to a child she had once cradled in her arms. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? Imagine helping the neighbor's kid with math homework one day, and the next day he's standing on a platform commanding your entire household. That's history's cruel humor. The historical fact is clear. Edward VI, guided by the Regency Council and especially Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, pushed England much further into Protestant reform. He didn't just break from the Pope as his father had done. He went further. The Latin Mass? Abolished. Crosses, statues, candles, labeled superstition and removed, and the most sacred ritual, the transformation of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, was replaced with a simple commemoration service. For Mary, a devout Catholic, this was nothing less than sacrilege. To her, the Mass was no performance, but a true miracle. Picture her each morning, kneeling in her chapel, Gregorian chants rising, incense thick in the air. It was her living link to her mother, to her childhood, to God. And now, all of it swept away by men declaring, "That's outdated." Here's a detail few know. At age 31, Mary was so devout she attended Mass not once, but 4 times a day. Yes, 4. Morning, noon, afternoon, evening. Foreign ambassadors wrote with astonishment, "Mary kneels for hours as if preparing for a holy death." If she lived today, she'd be the type who went to church more often than people check Facebook. Historians still debate what drove her. Some say Mary clung to rituals simply to fight loneliness, a kind of religious addiction to cover emotional wounds. Others argue she truly believed she was keeping the Catholic flame alive for all of England, the undying lamp in the dark. The truth likely lies in between. Part devotion, part survival. Isn't it ironic? Mary, a wealthy woman in her 30s with vast lands in East Anglia, could have lived in comfort. Instead, she became the living symbol of opposition. Edward and his council knew, as long as Mary continued her Latin rites, the conservative faithful would see her as the true queen. And sure enough, thousands of Catholics rallied around her name. One striking moment. In 1549, Edward banned the Mass outright. Mary refused. She even wrote to the council declaring, "My conscience cannot be compelled." Doesn't that sound like the old version of today's "I will not apologize for being myself"? Except back then, the punishment wasn't nasty comments online, it was the stake. Edward was so enraged he wanted her arrested at once, and who intervened? None other than Emperor Charles V, Mary's cousin in Spain. He warned bluntly, if Mary were harmed, Spain would cut ties, international power as protection. And so Mary survived, though restricted to private masses behind closed doors. Scholars still argue, was Edward truly afraid of Mary's influence or simply unwilling to provoke Spain? Some say Mary's political magnetism was undeniable, that she embodied Catholic resistance. Others insist it was only Charles's shadow that saved her. Either way, Mary lived on. And here's a scene you won't forget. One summer night in Essex, 2 Spanish ships anchored offshore, waiting to carry Mary to safety. She packed her belongings, stuffed into sacks, whispering to her servants, "Shall I go or shall I stay? Does God want me to flee or to remain? The household panicked, but in the end, Mary stayed, as if some invisible hand told her, "Face your destiny here." If you've ever stood at a crossroads, torn between staying or leaving, letting go or holding on, you know the trembling that gripped her. Only Mary's choice was not just personal, it carried the weight of a kingdom. And so it seems God was not yet ready to let Mary escape. Edward would live only a few more years. She would not have to wait long before the throne changed hands again. And when Edward died, Mary's greatest chance, her chance to reclaim the crown, finally arrived. Take a deep breath, because now the story turns toward destiny, where a woman once cast aside suddenly became the center of an entire nation. If under Edward Mary was forced to bow her head, then the boy king's death opened the greatest chance of her life. In the summer of 1553, Edward VI died at only 15 years old. The royal chambers at Greenwich were heavy with the stench of death, and at that same moment, a plot was spun. Edward, before dying, left a will that bypassed both Mary and Elizabeth. Instead, he named Lady Jane Grey, a teenage girl still in school dresses, was suddenly placed on the throne. Picture it. The CEO dies, and instead of promoting the seasoned deputy, the company hands the job to the intern. History remembers this as the 9 Days Queen, because Jane Grey reigned for only 9 days. And why? Because Mary refused to stay silent. At the time, Mary was in East Anglia, where she owned vast estates. The moment she heard, she left London and rode to Framlingham Castle. Picture a grey stone fortress rising from the fields, its heavy wooden gates shut tight. Inside sat Mary, back straight, eyes blazing. Word spread fast. The true princess is raising her banner. Farmers, conservative nobles, even moderate Protestants began flocking to her side. Why? Because Mary was the daughter of Henry VIII, the blood of the Tudors. Jane Grey was seen as nothing more than a pawn of scheming nobles. Here's the little-known detail. In just days, Mary gathered as many as 15,000 supporters. Not just soldiers, but farmers with pitchforks, merchants with kitchen knives. Crowds swarmed Framlingham like a sea of voices, singing hymns, shouting Mary's name. One account says when she appeared on the balcony, people wept openly. Some even knelt as if witnessing a miracle. Historians still debate, did Mary carefully plan this uprising, or was it simply a bold gamble powered by Tudor legitimacy? Some argue she was shrewd, choosing East Anglia, where Catholic loyalty ran deep. Others say she acted on instinct, lucky only because the people were tired of manipulation by Jane's backers. Either way, one truth is clear. Mary won her throne without spilling a drop of blood. From Gloucester to Yorkshire, processions proclaimed Mary as queen. No battles, no armies clashing. Jane Grey was abandoned, her support collapsing overnight. And so, after 9 short days, Jane was deposed. On August 3, 1553, Mary entered London. Imagine the scene. Streets draped in velvet, church bells pealing, torches blazing against the night sky. Crowds packed the roads, weeping, cheering, singing hymns as Mary rode into the city. Quoting scripture, she declared, "If God is with us, who can be against us?" It rang out like the cry of someone once humiliated, now returned in glory. One touching detail, Mary didn't just march in triumph, she stopped at the Tower of London. Once her prison, now her gateway. Witnesses said she wept, whispering that this was the day God had vindicated her. Scholars still debate the people's motives. Was it true loyalty to Mary, or just exhaustion with the politics of the Regency Council? Some insist Mary was beloved as the only legitimate daughter of Henry VIII. Others warn, don't romanticize it. Much of that support was simply backlash against manipulation. But whatever the reason, the result was undeniable. Mary now sat on the throne. For the first time in English history, a woman ruled with full sovereign power. Can you feel it? From serving her baby sister to becoming the nation's queen, Mary's life turned like a Netflix epic. The camera pans from tears of yesterday to thunderous cheers today. And remember, Mary was 37 years old, no longer a girl, but a mature woman, scarred and seasoned, ready to rule. And if you've got goosebumps listening, let me tease with a little humor. From lady-in-waiting to crowned queen, history's plot twists are wilder than winning the lottery. Mary Tudor, now Queen Mary I, finally had it all: the throne, the crown, and the chance to rewrite history. But as you'll soon see, triumph was only the overture. The glory would quickly darken with storm clouds, because harder than seizing a crown is keeping it and leaving behind a legacy of respect. Adjust your pillow, pull the blanket a little higher, because this next part may sound romantic, but in truth, it was one of the most controversial turns in Mary's life. After reclaiming the throne, Mary had everything: the crown, the cheers of her people, and the chance to restore the Catholic faith she had cherished since childhood. But then came the great question: whom would a single queen marry? For Mary, marriage was never just personal, it was political strategy. She was 37, already considered late for marriage by the standards of her time, and to secure the throne, she needed a husband who could strengthen her rule and, hopefully, give her a son. The historical fact is clear. Mary chose Philip, son of Emperor Charles V of Spain. Bold and dangerous at once, the English disliked the very idea of a foreign king, especially a Spaniard. Spain then was powerful, but seen as arrogant. In London streets, whispers spread: will the Queen make England a vassal of the Habsburg Empire? Here's a detail few know. Before making her choice public, Mary spent hours on her knees in a private chapel, praying. Then she rose and declared to her council, "God has chosen Philip for me, as he once chose Joseph for the Virgin Mary." The Privy Council was stunned. They had hoped she would choose an English nobleman to calm the people. Historians still debate, did Mary truly love Philip, or was it pure politics? Some say she was genuinely smitten, pointing to letters she wrote to Emperor Charles V, praising Philip's virtue and talents. Others argue Mary convinced herself it was love because she longed so desperately for family, for a child, the very thing her broken childhood had denied her. Picture the wedding. July 25, 1554, in Winchester Cathedral. Mary walked down the long aisle in her heavy royal gown, scepter in hand, hymns echoing in Latin. And instead of a jeweled diamond, she chose a plain gold band, saying she wished to marry as the maidens of old did. A simple detail, but revealing, as if she dreamed of genuine love, not just a political bond. Spanish courtiers, however, mocked her. One called the English queen a perfect saint, but poorly dressed, and wrote that Philip had to use patience and skill to endure the marriage. Painful, isn't it? Mary poured out praise, while the other side saw only duty. If this were a romance film, the audience would sigh, "Oh, Mary, you picked the wrong man." But whatever the private feelings, the politics were plain. This marriage marked the official return of Catholicism in England. Mary launched her great mission, undoing Henry and Edward's reforms, binding England back to Rome. Churches restored, Latin Mass revived, crucifixes and images of the Virgin Mary returned. Once again, Ave Maria filled English cathedrals. Historians still argue how the people truly felt. Some say many were relieved. Catholicism was the old familiar faith. Others say resentment grew, as 2 decades of Reformation had seeded a new generation accustomed to English scripture and simpler worship. In truth, Mary's restoration won genuine support at first, but that support soon cracked when harsher measures followed. Do you feel it? Behind the candlelight of Winchester's wedding, behind the triumphant bells, shadows of division were already stirring. Mary had won what she wanted, a royal husband, a church reunited with Rome. but she had also planted seeds of rebellion. And soon those seeds would sprout into uprisings, fire and blood. That was the price of trying to hold love, faith, and power all in one hand. A little joke: if social media had existed then, Mary and Philip would have been trending, but flooded with comments like, "Why marry a foreign king, my queen?" Mary was now married, Catholicism restored, her lifelong dream fulfilled. But the question was, how long would her happiness last? And the answer, as you're about to hear, is far from sweet. Close your eyes and let me guide you into the strangest, most tragic chapter of Mary's life. After her grand wedding to Philip in 1554, England was full of hope. At last, the Queen had a husband, and surely a prince would soon follow. The news spread like wildfire, and before long Mary announced she was pregnant. Joy exploded everywhere. Church bells rang across London. Embroiderers prepared tiny robes, carpenters built a golden cradle, and courtiers buzzed about the coming day. For Mary, this was more than a child. It was proof that God stood with her, that every humiliation of her youth, being called a bastard, serving her baby sister Elizabeth, could all be wiped away by one true-born son. Her belly grew. She complained of pains like labor. Doctors predicted the birth for June 1555. The kingdom held its breath, but June passed. No baby's cry. July, still nothing. Whispers began. Rumors spread that the court planned to smuggle in a newborn and pass it off as the royal heir if Mary failed. It sounds like a Netflix plot, but the fear was real. Contemporary records confirm it. To this day, historians argue, was Mary ever truly pregnant? Some suspect ovarian cysts or tumors. Others say it was a phantom pregnancy, where longing and faith are so strong the body creates every symptom. What deepens the tragedy is that Mary never doubted. She prayed for hours at Hampton Court, hand pressed to her belly, whispering that the child stirred within her. Even in July, 11 months into this supposed pregnancy, she insisted God had blessed her. A Spanish envoy recorded her words. "I feel the child move," but in his letters home, he wrote plainly, "There are no signs." Imagine that. The raw power of a woman's longing to be a mother, enough to blind her to reality. But when summer faded and nothing came, hope turned to ridicule. Londoners joked the Queen was carrying a puppy, or nothing but wind. The whole episode ended in silence. Mary slipped quietly out of Hampton Court. No announcement, no christening, no child. Her reputation collapsed. Philip, already distant, drifted further. He soon left for the continent, abandoning Mary in her cold palace. Surviving letters hint he even felt relieved to escape the shadow of his sorrowful wife. The pain wasn't over. In 1557, Mary again announced she was pregnant. This time she even drafted a will, naming her unborn child as heir to a Catholic kingdom. The court prepared once more, but suspicion hung heavy, and again the same pattern. Swelling belly, phantom pains, endless prayers. And then, nothing. Another cruel disappointment, another round of mockery. What was the truth? Scholars still debate. Fibroids, hormonal disorders, psychological illusion? Whatever the cause, these failed pregnancies cemented Mary's image as a queen deceived by her own body, pitied, ridiculed, and betrayed by fate. Picture her by the palace window, gazing out over the Thames, the same river that carried Philip away from England. She sat there for hours, silent, as if waiting for happiness to return. If you've ever seen someone stare long at the place where their love departed, you know how heavy that pain feels. Denied the chance to be a mother, Mary clung tighter to her faith. If she could not give birth to a son, then she would give birth to a Catholic England. That conviction hardened her, driving her toward extremity in her final years. 2 phantom pregnancies shattered her spirit and shattered her popularity. From glowing hope to whispered jokes, her reign slipped into shadow. and those cruel laughs echoed through the stone halls like knives across her heart. Bitter irony, isn't it? A queen who held a kingdom in her hands could not hold the simplest treasure she longed for, a child. Some historians see the phantom pregnancies as medical mystery, others see them as metaphor. Her reign itself a phantom, swelling with promise, ending in emptiness. And you might smile faintly, imagining the hashtags if social media had existed. Royal baby watch, turning into false alarm within months, Mary the butt of endless jokes. But behind the laughter was real pain. The pain of a woman who believed, who hoped, and who was left alone. Do you hear it? Mary's dream of heirs was only an illusion, and when that illusion dissolved, all that remained was a wounded heart, a fragile throne, and a queen ready to fill her emptiness with the flames of faith. That was the moment history began to call her by the name that still chills us, Bloody Mary. Listen. When Mary's 2 phantom pregnancies had passed and her heart lay in pieces, she clung to the only thing left to her, faith. If she could not be mother to a child, she would be mother to a Catholic England. And from that moment, the fire in her soul burst into flames so real they consumed hundreds of lives. This was when the name Bloody Mary began to carve itself into history. Picture London in 1555, fog curling along the cobbled streets, church bells tolling urgently to announce an execution. Crowds pressed into the square, some faces excited, others grim. All eyes fixed on a wooden stake. And the condemned was no thief or murderer, but a Protestant preacher. His crime? Denying the Mass, claiming bread and wine were only symbols, not the true body and blood of Christ. In Mary's eyes, that was rebellion against God, and thus treason against her throne. The penalty for such treason was fire. The historical record is stark. In just 4 years, more than 300 men and women, even the young, were burned alive. These were not secret punishments, but public spectacles, meant as lessons. Flames roared, bodies blackened, screams tangled with prayers. The people trembled, half horrified, half drawn to the spectacle. And Mary believed she was righteous, cleansing England of heresy. One chilling case was Thomas Cranmer, the very archbishop who had helped Henry VIII divorce Catherine, Mary's mother. For Mary, Cranmer had stolen her childhood and her honor. His sentence, death by fire, was as much vengeance as it was theology. At first he faltered, signing a recantation to save his life, but on the pyre he shouted instead, "I retract it all. The Pope is the enemy of God, the Mass is heresy." Then, thrusting into the flames the very hand that had signed his recantation, he let it burn first. That moment turned Cranmer into a Protestant martyr, and Mary, in the eyes of many, into a tyrant. Historians still wrestle with the question, was Mary truly cruel, or was she simply blinded by her faith? Some argue she was bloodthirsty, indulging in vengeance. Others insist she believed, with utter sincerity, that she was saving souls, that better a few hundred perish in fire than millions burn eternally in hell. The truth likely lies between. But the outcome? England did not remember her as a saint, but as a queen of blood. Here's a little detail. These burnings were meticulously recorded by John Foxe in his Book of Martyrs. Through his words, the image of Bloody Mary seared itself into the minds of generations. Foxe wrote of the blind, the elderly, pregnant women, even young couples hand in hand as they stepped into the fire. Reading it chills the blood, but for Mary, this was glory. To her, their deaths testified that God stood beside her. Reality, however, is harsher than dreams of faith. The more pyres burned, the more people turned against her. At first, many had cheered her as Henry VIII's true-born daughter, the rightful Tudor heir. But after years of smoke and ash, all they saw was fire. Whispers spread. England was being dragged back into the Dark Ages. Instead of a merciful queen, they had a woman obsessed with flames. Her people's faith faltered, and her reputation plummeted. And the irony is bitter. While Mary burned heretics in the square, inside her palace rumors swirled that she was pregnant again. Another phantom pregnancy in 1557. This time, people sneered. Her belly was nothing but the hot air of her fires. If Twitter had existed, Phantom Baby would have trended right beside Bloody Mary. Her downfall reached its peak in 1558, when England lost Calais, the last English foothold in France after more than 2 centuries. For her subjects, it was national disgrace. For Mary, it was shattering. She cried out in despair, "When I die, in my heart will be written the word Calais." The line was tragic because she knew her reign was collapsing. Even now, scholars debate, was Mary doomed by her religious extremism or by her unhappy marriage to Philip? Some say she might have been strong had she focused on governing instead of doctrine. Others insist England itself had already changed too much and no one could turn the wheel backward. But her legacy is plain. Mary died in 1558, alone, childless, with no victories to her name, only the ashes of the fires she lit. Picture her final moments, a dark chamber, cold wind seeping through the shutters, Mary drifting into unconsciousness, murmuring prayers. In visions, she saw angelic children playing music as if heaven were opening, but in reality, she left no child, no heir. Philip, the husband she adored, wrote that he felt a moderate sorrow at her death, then immediately proposed marriage to Elizabeth. And in a cruel twist, Mary was not buried beside her mother Catherine as she wished, but next to the sister she had hated, Elizabeth. The tomb bears Elizabeth's name. Mary's name appears only faintly on a small black slab. If you feel your heart sinking, let me ease it with a dark smile. From Mother of England to nothing more than a cocktail on the bar menu. That's how history remembers Bloody Mary. There it is, her years of fire left behind, not holiness, but a bitter lesson. Absolute faith, when wielded as a weapon, can destroy an entire reign. And the next time you hear church bells echo at night, remember a queen who believed so fiercely in God she lit the pyres of hundreds, only to be remembered in blood and irony. Take a slow breath. Because now the story enters the stage where the light of victory had faded, leaving only heavy shadows across the Tudor court. When the fires of execution had become a familiar sight, the people no longer felt joy, only doubt. By this time, Mary's reign was crumbling, and the cracks of decline showed everywhere. Picture London in 1557 and 1558. Skies gray, drizzle unending, markets half empty as plague spread. The people, already weary from poor harvests and heavy taxes, now faced war. Under Philip's influence, Mary dragged England into conflict with France to support Spain. And then came the fatal blow. In January 1558, England lost Calais, its last foothold on the continent, and lost hold on possibilities, which went on for 40 years. This was a thunderclap across Europe. Calais had been English for more than 200 years, a symbol of pride, and it fell to France after only 8 days of siege. For the English, it was national humiliation. For Mary, it was personal disgrace. She lamented, "When I die, in my heart will be written the word Calais," a line both tragic and bitter, sealing her despair as queen. Few recall this detail. At the very moment Calais was lost, Mary still believed she was pregnant again. The court had even prepared for the birth of the little heir. But instead of a baby's cry, the news was of a fortress gone forever. A double blow, the illusion of motherhood shattered, and England's military pride erased. Historians still debate how much blame Mary truly bore. Some argue it was the inevitable result of dragging England into a war the people never wanted. Others point out she had little choice. England was weak and Philip pressed her hard. But in the eyes of her subjects, the failure was hers alone, and it branded her reign with a stain that never washed away. Meanwhile, Mary's private life was sinking into loneliness. Philip had all but abandoned her, returning only briefly, treating England as if he were a guest. When he was present, he was cold, distant. Letters survive in which Mary poured out devotion, begging for his affection, only to be met with silence or curt replies. Imagine the ache, like someone sending endless messages, "Do you miss me?" only to see them left unread. Even as queen, Mary endured neglect. Her health broke down. Records suggest ovarian cancer or perhaps uterine tumors. She suffered severe abdominal pain, depression, exhaustion. At the same time, an epidemic ravaged London, killing thousands. Perhaps she too was touched by it. The image of the queen then was pitiful. Hollow cheeks, dark rings under her eyes, her once proud gowns hanging loose on a frail frame. A strange, sorrowful detail. Even in her final days, Mary clung to the hope of motherhood. She drafted a will, naming her unborn child as heir, praying for a Catholic future. But of course, no child came. That last hope, too, was only an illusion. As illusory as her reign itself. The scholars still argue, did Mary die of physical illness or of broken spirit? Some insist cancer killed her. Others say her defeat, her loveless marriage, and her consuming faith wore her down more than any disease. Truth is, when heart and will have shattered, the body rarely holds long. In her final days, Mary slipped into delirium. Witnesses claimed she murmured of angelic children singing, as if heaven sent her the children she never bore, beautiful and heartbreaking. The last dream of a woman who longed only to be a mother. On November 17, 1558, Mary Tudor breathed her last at the age of 42. She left no child, no victories, only a reign remembered for smoke and screams. Philip, when told, wrote that he felt a moderate sorrow. Then, almost at once, began marriage talks with the new queen, Elizabeth. A last betrayal, though Mary was gone to see it. Her death left another cruel irony. Mary wished to lie beside her mother Catherine of Aragon. Instead, she was buried with Elizabeth, the half-sister she had despised all her life. The grand tomb bears Elizabeth's name. Mary's appears only faintly, carved on a small black slab, as though history itself pushed her into her sister's shadow. Do you see the irony? A lifetime spent fighting to prove legitimacy, to restore honor, to create a new line, ending in loneliness, buried beneath the name of her rival. And what the world remembers is not the queen who won back her throne from Jane Grey, but Bloody Mary, the queen who lit the fires. And if you're listening with a heavy heart, let me soften it with a dark smile. Perhaps Mary proves the old saying, faith can move mountains, but it can also burn down kingdoms. Though Mary Tudor's reign closed, Calais lost, her husband gone, her health broken, her hopes of motherhood vanished, what remains is a bitter lesson. When personal wounds fuse with fanatic faith, they can destroy not only a life, but the legacy of a dynasty. And tonight, as you hear the wind whisper outside your window, remember, there was once a queen who prayed herself into exhaustion, begging God for a child, and died with nothing but silence and the shadow of her own fires. Take one last deep breath, because this closing chapter takes you into the dark bedchamber of Mary Tudor, where whispered prayers mingled with groans of illness, where a queen once majestic was now only a frail shadow. After everything, 2 phantom pregnancies, the fires of execution, the loss of Calais, and her husband's cold neglect, Mary entered her final days in both physical and spiritual ruin. By late 1558, her health collapsed quickly. She suffered fevers, sharp abdominal pain, perhaps ovarian cancer, perhaps uterine disease, scholars still debate. But what was certain, her spirit was broken. An epidemic swept London. killing thousands, and Mary believed it was the final trial sent by God. Instead of retreating, she prayed harder, clinging to faith as if it could hold her decaying body together. A strange detail. Even while bedridden, Mary insisted she might be pregnant again. She ordered a will written, naming the unborn child as heir, who would keep England forever Catholic. Odd, yes, but revealing. She lived inside an illusion, clinging to the dream of motherhood even as death pressed close. Imagine the bitter smiles of her council hearing that news. Once again, only false hope. Historians still argue, did Mary truly deceive herself until the end, or did she knowingly pretend to keep hope alive for herself and her Catholic supporters? Either way, as she lay dying, all knew the dynasty would end childless. On November 17, 1558, Mary Tudor breathed her last at 42. Attendants reported she drifted in and out of visions, saying she saw angelic children singing and playing instruments. For a woman who had longed all her life for a child, perhaps that was her only comfort. Imaginary children, never real in her arms. The moment Mary died, power passed instantly to Elizabeth, the half-sister Mary had loathed. Bitter irony, only hours after Mary's final breath, cheers rang through London's streets. For the people, it was relief. After smoke and sorrow, a new hope in a young, clever, vigorous queen. Crueler still, Mary's dying wish was to be buried beside her mother, Catherine of Aragon, at Peterborough. She longed for one last reunion. Instead, the court placed her in Westminster Abbey, in a shared tomb with Elizabeth. The great monument honors Elizabeth Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, with statues and glowing inscriptions. Mary is marked only by a faint line of text on a black slab, as if history itself pushed her beneath her sister's shadow. Do you see the tragedy? A woman who fought her whole life to prove legitimacy, to erase the shame of being called a bastard, was buried beneath the name of her rival, remembered only by the infamous title, Bloody Mary. Not even death gave her the smallest victory. Even now, historians disagree on her legacy. Some call her a bloodthirsty tyrant, leaving behind hundreds of charred corpses. Others say she was a victim of her age, a woman crushed in youth, clinging to faith as her only lifeline. More balanced voices admit she was also the first woman to rule England with full sovereignty, a queen who dared claim power in a man's world. But the way she kept that throne, with fire and blood, darkened everything else. Imagine if Mary had borne a healthy prince, or if she had not obsessed with burning heretics. Perhaps history would remember her as Mary the Pious instead of Bloody Mary. But history has no room for ifs. What remains is the cruel laughter of fate. In tonight's dim silence, you might feel her story like a mournful melody. It began with bright notes of a royal birth, swelled into tense crescendos of power struggles, and faded into a sorrowful tune of illness and solitude. And its final chord was not triumph, but emptiness, like the hollow whistle of wind through an abandoned chapel. And allow me one wry aside. In some bar centuries later, when someone orders a Bloody Mary cocktail, they may not realize the name carries an entire shattered life. A queen who once dreamed of children's cries, who believed she was chosen by God, but who is remembered only as a drink of vodka and tomato juice. Mary Tudor died this way, but her story lives on, a reminder that power cannot heal a broken heart, and faith, when twisted to extremes, can turn back against the one who clings to it. And tonight, as you drift into sleep, let the whispers of the past remind you, no throne is large enough to fill an empty soul, and no flame burns bright enough to erase the shadows within. You still remember the candlelight in London's palace during the winter of 1558. Picture it, flickering on cold stone walls, reflecting the thin figure of Mary Tudor, a queen of 42, with no husband at her side, no heir, no victories to recount. Each heavy step along the corridors sounded like a funeral drum, announcing the end. After her death, the court sank into a silence hard to name. Almost immediately, Elizabeth was crowned. Cheers burst across the streets, and the crowds shifted their loyalties overnight. The name Mary nearly vanished within days. The Tudor throne never lacked successors, and history is never patient with those who lose. Yet in the shadows, Mary left quieter legacies. Few recall that she was England's first queen to rule with full sovereign power, not as a consort standing behind a husband. She proved a woman could sit upon the throne, command court and army alike. Elizabeth would inherit the glory, but Mary had laid the foundation. The irony is sharp. The woman condemned as Bloody Mary was the one who placed the first stone in the path of female political power in England. If you walk through Westminster Abbey today, you'll see the shared tomb of Mary and Elizabeth. Outwardly it's grand. Elizabeth's effigy lies in splendor, crown gleaming. Mary has no effigy of her own, only a line of inscription noting that two sisters lie here, joined in hope of resurrection. It sounds warm, but in truth, it is a double burial of defeat. Mary denied rest beside her mother Catherine of Aragon, her name swallowed beneath Elizabeth's shining legacy. You might even smirk bitterly. Even in death, the rivalry of these two Tudor women did not end. Historians still argue whether Mary truly deserves the title Bloody Mary. 300 burned souls may sound horrific, but compared with the tens of thousands killed in religious purges elsewhere in Europe, the number seems smaller. Some argue her nickname stuck mainly because of John Fox's Book of Martyrs, a Protestant work of propaganda that painted her as a monster and lifted Elizabeth as a savior. In other words, Bloody Mary may have been a 16th century media campaign, one of the most successful smear jobs in history. Sounds familiar? Just like how modern headlines can turn a politician into either a hero or a villain in a few words. Still, it cannot be denied that Mary signed the death warrants, that she truly believed fire could save souls, and this is her greatest paradox, at once a deeply wounded woman and the wound giver to hundreds of others. That is why her image still flickers between pity and anger. Notice, throughout her life, Mary was haunted by three obsessions: love, faith, and legitimacy. Love she placed in Philip, and was abandoned. Faith she clung to until the end, and it drove her into extremity. Legitimacy she tried to prove with her crown, but in the end it was Elizabeth who received all the praise. What greater tragedy than to see every pillar of your belief turn to ash? Yet even in that tragedy, Mary left some small positives. She restored a few monasteries, returned lands to the church, and, most importantly, she proved the throne was not only for men. Without Mary, would Elizabeth have been accepted so easily? Many scholars argue that Mary accustomed the English to the idea of a ruling queen, paving the way for the Virgin Queen's golden age. Do you see now? History is never simple black and white. Mary was not only a bloodthirsty tyrant, nor only a tragic victim. She was both, and neither. A complicated human being, like all of us. And allow a little jest, if Mary lived in the 21st century, she'd probably be the type to post inspirational statuses like, "God has a plan for me," with a little flame emoji, only to become a meme minutes later. But instead of a few hundred online comments, she carried a nickname, Bloody Mary, for centuries. In the final view, Mary is more than a figure from history. She is a cautionary tale of how personal wounds, when fused with power, can burn an entire nation. A child dismissed as illegitimate, a girl forced to betray her mother, a woman abandoned in marriage. Those scars became the flames that consumed her realm. And perhaps that is her deepest tragedy. What she inflicted on others was the mirror of what life had inflicted on her. If you think carefully, Mary does not feel so distant. We too cling to beliefs, fall for false hopes, struggle to prove our worth to the world. The only difference We don't hold a kingdom in our hands, and others do not die for our wounds. And so, as the wind blows through the towers of Westminster, you can almost picture Mary's shadow drifting quietly, her dark cloak brushing the stone floor, her eyes staring far away. No more cheering crowds, no more bells of triumph. Only a woman who once loved, once believed, once hoped, and failed. That is the moment your heart sinks, ready for a good night's rest, because this story has led you through the thorniest turns of history, and now the light fades, leaving only silence. You've walked with me the whole road, from the ringing bells that welcomed Mary Tudor's birth, to her faint last breath in a cold London chamber. Now let your shoulders drop, let each breath slow, because all that remains is the lingering echo of a sorrowful song. Mary's image drifts across your mind in many layers, a red-haired child studying Latin by candlelight, a trembling girl signing a paper that denied her own mother, a grown woman in royal robes entering London to the sound of victory hymns, and at the end, a lonely queen staring across the Thames, convinced her happiness had slipped away forever. Some remember Mary as Bloody Mary, the queen who burned hundreds. Others see her as a victim of fate, of a shattered childhood, of motherhood dreams that never came true. Historians will argue forever, but you and I in this moment need not judge. We only listen to the echoes of the past, the whispered prayers, the tolling church bells, the wind brushing across a gravestone etched with her name beneath Elizabeth's shadow. If Mary leaves you with anything tonight, it's this: power cannot erase private wounds, and sometimes what a human being needs most is not a crown or a flame, but simply an embrace, a child's cry, or a gentle word of comfort. So when you close your eyes, let Mary's story fade into a distant tide, drifting away into silence. You are safe. You are here. You do not live in a palace of intrigue. All that remains is steady breath and peace rising quietly around you. Sleep deeply, sleep softly, and let history whisper in your dreams like a lullaby without words.